Good morning, everybody. My name is Bob Duchesne. I host a radio show in Bangor called Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine. I am the best host in Maine that they could get on short notice for free.
That's me talking to a boatload of people as we pulled away from the dock in Bar Harbor and set off on a first-ever trip up the Penobscot River to Bangor that I got to host. All this happened last weekend on the Friendship 5, a Bar Harbor whale watch boat that could take hundreds of people out to see whales. But in this case, we were out to make history and learn natural history. Because this big boat is also fast enough to make the run there and back in one day, even when stopping all along the way to visit 11 lighthouses, 2 historic bridges, a major fort, 1 significant Revolutionary War screw-up, and much more. Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine is brought to you by Hammond Lumber, Doors Equipment, Bar Harbor Whale Watch, Napa Auto Parts, and EBS. Today's show is the first half of last weekend's journey. In fact, I don't think we'll get much past Castine, maybe the Deer Isle Bridge. As the show starts, the chief naturalist for Bar Harbor Whale Watch, Zach Cliver, gets things rolling.
Okay, well, good morning, everyone. Welcome aboard the Friendship 5. It's great to have you here. And wow, what a perfect day to go on a boat cruise. So we have another bluebird day with flat calm water. So it's going to be a great day for photography and seeing a lot of incredible things. We're excited to have you here. My name is Zach Cliver, and I work as a naturalist on the boat. And I will be one of the people that's helping guide the trip. And when we get a few more people on, we'll be talking to you more and talking a little bit about the boat. And of course, we'll be turning it over to our host as well to say hi, Bob Duchesne. He's up on the top of the boat right now if you're looking for him.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Bob Duchesne. I host a radio show in Bangor called Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine. I am the best host in Maine that they could get on short notice for free. More recently, I've done a number of things. I'm a bird expert, not by training, but by avocation. So I now lead birding tours, and I can tell you that we have a whole string of black guillemot babies behind the boat, all those little white dots in the water. I can tell you that there's 4 species of gull sitting on that wharf over there. And how many people would actually care if I told you that? All right, I got some. So I won't ignore them. I'll be pointing out wildlife. In terms of being a naturalist, my undergraduate degree was in government. My master's was in business, so I'm an idiot savant about birds. Of no training. If you ask me a question about wildlife, I will be able to answer it, just not correctly.
Seriously, do these guys know me? Give me a microphone and an audience, and it's all mischief from here on. Well, no matter, it's too late. I've got a mic, a crowd, and an awesome day, and the only thing standing between us and departure from the dock is that the captain has to alert everybody else in the harbor that we're coming out, which is done with the loudest horn in Hancock County.
Okay, well, again, welcome aboard. And by the way, back on the right side, there's the reason why this is called Bar Harbor. There is a bar over there, and it's made of rock and sand and gravel that connects Bar Harbor to Bar Island, which is right behind us. At low tide, we do have 8 to 12-foot tides here. The bar is quite wide, and you can even drive your car across the bar over to Bar Island. The bar is exposed for about 5 hours, twice a day, around low tide. So it is fun to go out to the island, which is owned by the park, and hike all over it. A lot of wildlife out there. Family of deer live out on the island. And it is fun to stand out on the bar and think you'd be underwater at high tide. That gives you a real profound sense of the tides. So that is why this is called the town of Bar Harbor, not because we have 100 bars in town, right? Which we do, yes. So Bar Harbor was first settled in 1763, and the town was incorporated in 1796. And the original name of this town was Eden. It was named after an English statesman, Sir Richard Eden. At that time, Maine was part of Massachusetts, and so it wasn't until 1820 that Maine separated from Massachusetts. So originally this was Eden, Massachusetts. And wasn't until 1918 that they changed the name. The fathers of the town decided that it was more appropriate to name it after the bar, so they changed it to Bar Harbor. We do, Bob, did you mention the clock system? No. Okay, yeah, we do use a clock system to call things out, so it's a simple system. Everything in front of the boat, directly ahead of us, is always at 12 o'clock. On the right side here, going down the right side clockwise, 1 through 5 o'clock. Any wildlife or things of interest behind the boat will always be directly at 6 o'clock to us, and then everything on the left side, 7 through 11 o'clock. Okay, so that's the system we'll use to call out everything. You'll notice that we're running over the top of the lobster buoys. That's because we have no propellers. This boat is a jet-powered boat, so we cannot harm the lobster fishermen's gear. We cannot harm whales or wildlife, and so we only have a 4-foot draft. This boat was designed in Australia. It's an in-cat design, and it's mostly aluminum so that it's very light and quick across the water, and we'll be traveling upwards of about 33 miles per hour at a top speed.
This trip on the Friendship 5 happened last Saturday, a beautiful day with almost no wind. We're barely out of the harbor when we're confronted with another piece of Bar Harbor's history, which Chief Naturalist Zach Cliver explains.
Here's a man-made rock wall called the Breakwater, and it's on the left side here. We're slowing down for the little lobster boat over here on the right and the one just up ahead of us, not to create too much of a wake for them, but you're looking right down the length of the Breakwater here at 9 o'clock. This rock wall was built between 1908 and 1914 at the request of J.P. Morgan, the most wealthy man in America, summered here, but he preferred to be on his yacht. He had a big sailing ship, and it would anchor out here in the harbor. And he realized the harbor was very exposed to big waves and needed more protection. So he paid the Army Corps of Engineers to build this. It was built between 1908 and 1914. It's a half-mile long. It has 400,000 tons of rock piled up there. It's a 60-foot underwater rock wall. And so quite an engineering feat, and does an excellent job of protecting Bar Harbor.
Well, once again, this is Bob Duchesne up on the spotter's deck on the top deck. This is the flight to Cincinnati. If you were not planning to go to Cincinnati, please inform the captain. I did promise to spot birds on occasion. Every now and then, you may see a small gray bird in the water with little white wing patches. It's called a black guillemot. Whoops, harbor porpoise just popped up at 3 o'clock. They'll usually pop up 3 or 4 times and then disappear for a while. We should be seeing a lot of those. But black guillemots are actually members of the puffin family. They're called alcids, the Latin term alcidae. And that includes puffins, razorbills, murres, dovekies. And it turns out the black guillemots are the only member of this family that nest right along the mainland. There's a particular type of fish that is their favorite. That happens near the coastline. So we see a lot of those from land. The others, like puffins, you have to go out to sea for, except for rare occasions. So if you see a gray bird with white wing patches, that's likely to be a small juvenile black guillemot. The adults are still fully black. They'll all go to gray for the winter, and some of them have already started. They have bright red feet, which apparently the lady guillemots think is sexy. This being the Gulf of Maine, we have a lot more birds than people realize, including gulls. Most of us are probably used to herring gulls, which is the common gull you see a lot. If you're near the Bangor Mall, you might see a lot of ring-billed gulls sitting there on the grass or around a McDonald's parking lot. Well, both of those are actually out here with us too. We've just passed through a bunch of them. We also had some laughing gulls that we just passed through a moment ago, and we'll be seeing more of those, I would expect. Off at 3 o'clock, more harbor porpoises are surfacing. Harbor porpoises are not very enthusiastic jumpers. They sort of roll over the top 3 or 4 times. You see the fin pop out of the water. The sun reflects off the glare and sometimes catches your eye, and that's about the best they do. When it comes to it, harbor porpoises are pretty boring.
Today's episode of Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine took place last Saturday in the Friendship 5. as I got to host the historic Bar Harbor Whale Watch excursion from Bar Harbor to Bangor. Along the way, we hit 11 lighthouses. In fact, we're heading up to the first one right now. It's a lighthouse I've never seen. In fact, I didn't even know it was there, even though it marks the way into Somme Sound. It'll take us about 10 minutes to get there, but it's only going to take you 3. Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine returns in a moment on Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. Welcome back to Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. This is a big show today. In fact, it's too big to fit into one episode. Last weekend, Bar Harbor Whale Watch took a boatload of people from Bar Harbor to Bangor on board the Friendship 5, one of the few commercial boats in the world that could make that round trip in one day. It's fast. And I'm the host. We'll get the first half of that trip into today's show and the second half next weekend. We're going to get some history and meet some lighthouses. We're now floating next to one of our oldest. President Martin Van Buren authorized this one. It marks the way toward northeast and southwest harbors, and unless you're on a boat, you're never going to see it. Gene Torbeck is the lighthouse expert on this boat.
This is Bear Island over here on the right. Very beautiful lighthouse. 1838, when it was first built. Lasted here until about 1981. And then it was decommissioned. And when they decommissioned it, it sat here for a couple of years, went to wreck. And then a local group, the Friends of Acadia, came out, did a lot of work on it. The island and the building is now owned by the park, all except for one small cottage around the other side. But everything else is owned by the park, and it is actually under a lease. It is leased to a professor from the Georgetown University, and he said he spent about $1 million on it the first 3 years making it livable. Spends his summers here. And if you're interested, his lease will be up in March of 2050. So diary that date. You too can live up here. A little bit about the lighthouses here in Maine. Originally, we had about 80 lighthouses in Maine. About 65 left. All of them are automated up here. None are manned anymore. And when they were manned, they liked the kids to have a lot of, like the keeper to have a lot of kids, because they'd have to take care of everything on the island here. So most keepers, 8, 10, 12 children. This lighthouse here was also a buoy terminal. Navigational aids were stored here. It was a coal station, and it was also a depot. So a lot of the supplies would be brought here, and then other lighthouses in the area would come over here by boat and pick up the supplies.
Okay, we're going to pick up speed and make our way out the Western Way, which is up ahead of us here on the left side toward 11 o'clock. We'll have Mount Desert Island on our right and the Cranberry Islands on our left. And then we'll be going past the Bass Harbor Light and into Blue Hill Bay. And our next stop is the Blue Hill Bay Light, which is about 15 minutes away. So enjoy the scenery and the ride, and our next stop will be in Blue Hill.
You're on board the Friendship 5. We're cruising from Bar Harbor to Bangor on a fast, all-aluminum jet-powered catamaran. So fast that we're already up to Blue Hill Light. So many of our classic lighthouses are on islands. You can't get there from here. This is a part of historic Maine that even people who live here their entire lives will never see. You need a boat.
This is the Blue Hill Bay Light. Originally established 1857, just a little bit before the Civil War. And it was originally called the Eggemogan Light or the Sand Island Light. The name was changed to the present name in 1872. It's located on a tiny island here. It's about 3/4 of an acre, low tide. It's called Green Island, which is one of a group of 4 islands called the Fly, F-L-Y, or the F-L-Y-E. And it's named after an early owner, Abraham Fly. He spelled his name F-L-Y-E, who said he sold it to the government in 1856 for $150. Sits right here at the entrance to Eggemogan Reach. In the mid-19th century, the town of Ellsworth, which is on Blue Hill Bay, was said to have been the second busiest lumber port in the entire world, which made a lighthouse here sort of a necessity. Tower height was 22 feet, had a 4th order Fresnel lens, and also had a foghorn here. Then its work was taken over by more easily maintained modern optic solar-powered light, which was mounted on a nearby skeleton tower. Flashes green every 4 seconds, has a range of about 5 miles. The light now serves as a guide to fishing boats and recreational boaters going through the bay here. When the side-wheeler J.T. Morris operated here, it provided daily passenger service and freight service between Rockland and Bar Harbor, so it was a familiar sight here. Also during the 1920s, a family living here typically had a ration of about 500 gallons of kerosene and about 3 tons of coal, which usually they had to supplement by getting some wood on these nearby islands. And fresh water came from a cistern, which they used to collect rain from. When you had families out here with no telephone, they sort of came up with some unique forms of communication. In the 1920s, when a keeper was needed on shore, a woman across on the mainland would hang a black suit outside her house as a signal. And last time I looked, this it's now in the National Register of Historic Places, and I think it's currently on the market for $850,000. Here we have a loon over here on the right side, right between us and the lighthouse. He just popped up on the service here, about halfway between us and the lighthouse.
Yeah, I was just asked about the loon. It is sort of in winter plumage. Loons really don't get old enough to breed until they're at least 3 years old. And really, they're not able to hold a territory against older loons until they're 5, 6. So sometimes it just doesn't make sense to go inland to compete, and some of the younger loons will just stay out here in the ocean. So it's not at all unusual to find common loons in the ocean, even in the middle of summer, even in breeding plumage. They can go back and forth to freshwater and saltwater, and they're pretty comfortable in both. And so this guy was not really in breeding plumage. It was probably a young loon that just didn't bother to go inland. Zach mentioned that Blue Hill is called Blue Hill because of the bluish color of the blueberries, which is true. What is additionally true is that the Native Americans even called it Blue Hill in their own tongue. But I get to talk a lot with the tribal historian for the Penobscot tribe, and we go over place names a lot because Maine has so many of them. In fact, even the Penobscot tribe, the Wabanaki Nation, called that Blue Hill because from the ocean, when they were canoeing up and down, it looked bluish. So they call that a spirit name. It's currently named in English, but in fact, the Native Americans always called it that before.
Speaking of Native Americans, the tribes use this area a lot. We're about to hit a site that held a secret for 1,000 years. And then we'll continue on to Castine and learn that Paul Revere may owe much of his fame to a good publicist, because he wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed when it came to military strategy. We're cruising from Bar Harbor to Bangor and back again on board the Friendship 5, the first time anyone has ever tried this. I hosted this Bar Harbor Whale Watch excursion last weekend, and we'll continue towards the Penobscot River when Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine returns in a moment on Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine, Saturday mornings at 9, Sunday mornings at 8 on Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. You're riding along with me today on the Friendship 5, a Bar Harbor Whale Watch boat big enough to hold hundreds of people, fast enough to go from Bar Harbor to Bangor and back again, stopping at 11 historic lighthouses, 2 historic bridges, and several historic forts along the way, all in less than 9 hours. Everybody thinks they know what Maine looks like, but you don't know what you're missing until you see it from this angle. No commercial trip has ever done this before, but we did it last Saturday, and I got to host. Along this portion of the trip, we're on the outskirts of Blue Hill Bay at a place called Naskeg Point in Brooklyn. The ocean has changed, and we don't really have oysters much anymore, but they did 1,000 years ago, and native tribes used to harvest them and discard the shells in big piles called middens. One of those piles had a big surprise. Chief Naturalist Zach Clivers holding the microphone.
They found 140 native artifacts at this site. They found arrowheads and pottery, and they were able to realize that based on the material, that some of these had been traded for from tribes as far away as New York and Quebec. Also, what made this discovery so amazing and special. At that site, they found a Viking coin buried down deep in the earth. They dated it to 1000 AD. It's the oldest Viking or European artifact found in North America. It predates the Viking settlements up in Newfoundland. So the question is, how did it get here? Did they trade for it, or did Vikings sail these waters 1,000 years ago? Recently, I had a chance to hear a professor of archaeology and history speak at the University of Maine. Her name's Annette Coldeny, and she has published a book based on many years of research called First Contact. It's all about the pre-Columbus contact between Europeans and the native peoples. At 9 o'clock, we should wave. There's a beautiful Friendship sloop over there on the left side of the boat. That was the lobster boat of 100 years ago, before there were mechanized lobster boats. There's a town here on the coast of Maine called Friendship, and a lot of them were built in that town, and so the boat became identified with this little town of Friendship near Tennant's Harbor and Port Clyde area. So we were talking about the Viking history. What's interesting, there's a seal diving down at 1 o'clock. That was a harbor seal, just dove underwater right off the right side here. The very first story that the Penobscot Indians have of Europeans describes a very big war canoe that sailed up the Penobscot River. It was there for 2 or 3 days. It had big men that were hairy and loud, and the native people didn't want anything to do with them. It sounds a lot like a Viking ship. So it is exciting to think that maybe Vikings sailed these waters 1,000 years ago.
Progress report. We left the Bar Harbor dock at 9 a.m. last Saturday morning. We zipped around Mount Desert Island, motored into Blue Hill Bay, zoomed through Eggemogan Reach, and at about 11 in the morning, dead ahead, a bridge I've seen many times from above, but not once from below. This all looks really different, very different. This is Maine from a different angle.
Just ahead of us, we are now approaching the Deer Isle Bridge. The Deer Isle Bridge is a suspension bridge spanning Eggemogan Reach. The bridge is the only vehicular connection from Maine, the mainland, to Little Deer Isle and Big Deer Isle. One of this, this bridge was completed in March 1939 and spans 1,088 feet. It encountered some wind stability problems that were similar to those of the original Tacoma Narrows Bridge in Washington, which collapsed shortly after it opened. The problems led to modifications, which include numerous cable stays connecting cables to the tower and the tower to the deck. The span carries 2 very narrow lanes, so you'll be able to look up and see it here.
So we go under the bridge, heading northwest along the shoreline of Little Deer Isle. It doesn't take long to reach the northern tip. A lighthouse here marks the way for boats that were headed through Eggemogan Reach and then due east toward Mount Desert Island and up the coast, or should I say headed down east. I suppose it also showed where you shouldn't go if your destination was Vinyl Haven, almost due south, or west towards Lincolnville. Once again, Gene Torbeck is the expert.
This is Pumpkin Island over here on the right. Originally built 1854. And it's been privately owned since 1934. It's located here at the northern end of Little Eggemogan Reach, just off Deer Isle. It's about 1.5 acres. It consists of a 28-foot tower and a colonial Cape keeper's house, attached to the tower by a work shed. First keeper was J.C. Tibbetts, made about $350 a year. He stayed here until 1861. In the 19th century, there was a lot of maritime traffic here, as this was a waterway connecting Blue Hill Bay and Penobscot Bay. 1870, Charles Leroy Babson, he was a native of nearby Brooklyn, became the keeper. And according to his family, his niece, Josephine Herrick, would tend the light when he was absent from the island. During the Civil War, Babson was shot during the Battle of Fredericksburg and lost his left leg. And when he was confined in a Rhode Island hospital, he was declared dead. But a nurse swore she saw one of his fingers move, and they eventually revived him. In the meantime, his brother went to Rhode Island to recover the body, and when he heard that his brother was still alive, he started back home, but he developed pneumonia and died on the way back home. Babson walked with a cane and returned to be the keeper, and he was the keeper here until 1902. Originally had a fifth order Fresnel lens, was visible for about 6 miles, was deactivated in 1934 when the lighthouse was replaced by a nearby automatic acetylene having a tough time saying that, acetylene-powered light, and then was put up for auction. It was actually purchased by George Harmon, who was a resident of Bar Harbor. He bought it along with 2 other lighthouses for $552. One of the other lighthouses he bought was the Winter Harbor Light, and we're talking the Winter Harbor Light over in Winter Harbor. There was a little bit of controversy with this light, and in 1874, a district engineer said that the light, along with several others, was not only useless, but it actually caused several disasters because they would draw vessels into passages obstructed by ice.
I hate when that happens. We're headed toward Castine next. Castine has quite a history. Not all of it good. Some of it pretty bad. Wait till you hear this. Also, there's another famous lighthouse over there that maybe you have been to, since Dice Head Light is on the mainland, and you can drive up to that one. We'll hit that one too, and as for me, I'm just trying to get my bearings. I've never seen Maine from this angle. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. You think you know Maine, and then you see it from a whole different angle and realize you didn't. From the time Indians canoed the coastline to get around to the time when sailing vessels and then steamships had to do it, Maine's rugged shore has been a challenge. All those peninsulas and islands and ledges were something you had to negotiate. If you're hugging the coastline to get up the coast, you've got to go past Castine. If you want to get up the Penobscot, you have to get past Castine. Castine has a deep natural harbor. It's got good bluffs for gun batteries and fortifications. Castine is a problem, or an opportunity, depending on who has control of it. If you had it, you could get troops up to Bangor in 5 days. If not, it would take you a month to march up there. Patrick Colloway studies this kind of stuff. He interned with the Castine Historical Society last year, and he's pursuing his Ph.D. at the University of Maine currently. Patrick was on board the Friendship 5 when we slid the Bar Harbor Whale Watch vessel into Castine Harbor last Saturday. As he explains, Castine has sometimes been a part of the country, sometimes not.
This was not always the United States. It changes hands between 7 and 9 times, depending on how you count occupation, between 1609 and the final settlement in 1815.
First, some of the shell middens in this area date back over 5,000 years. This is a very important place for the Indians, so they have an existential stake in it, and it's a natural trading area, especially in summer.
And this attracts the attention of French explorers, particularly Samuel de Champlain. He actually sails up the Penobscot to what is now modern-day Bangor, where he records that he met with a gentleman by the name of Bezabez, who was the local Native American chief. That establishes a train of very good interactions between the French and Native Americans in this area, primarily centered around the fur trade.
So it's important to the Indians, it's important to the French, and they're getting along together pretty well, especially when you throw in a healthy fur trade between the two. Plus, Champlain has a vague notion that these rivers heading north might connect with Quebec somehow, and that's strategically important to the French because they are never getting along with the English at this time. In fact, the French established a settlement in Mount Desert Island called Saint-Sauveur, and the English colonists under Captain John Smith came up from Plymouth, Massachusetts in 1613 and burned it to the ground. Well, that happens a lot. Somewhere in the 1620s, those Pilgrim colonists established a small trading settlement in Castine.
This attracts the attention of the French because they have land claims in this area as well. Depending on whose documentation you're reading, this place either belongs to the Crown of England, the Crown of Scotland, the Crown of France, or the Native Americans have some ideas on this themselves. That post is burned to the ground. It's another ongoing theme. The French established a more substantive post called Fort Pentegoet, which is right about where that white Catholic church is, about 9:30, 9:45 or so. That is actually the front gate of the fort.
In fact, one of the French soldiers, Baron de Duchesne, married the chief's daughter. Relationships are going pretty good, and someday the town is actually named Castine after this guy. Things stay peaceful for a little while, except when the Dutch stop by and burn the fort, and the French then rebuild in a different place. But really, nobody can run around here and do whatever they want. It's just not safe.
This really becomes no man's land as far as Europeans are concerned. We're pretty sure that the French own up to about Nova Scotia, maybe the Nova Scotia-New Brunswick line. We know that the English own from Brunswick south. What happens in the middle is a borderland. Effectively, it's under the control of the Native Americans, but the land claims going back and forth between the various European empires do not stop. It is not clear until 1711 who it actually belongs to, and when the English take over Nova Scotia. So now it is all English territory up and down the English seaboard, but owning it on paper and having European title and owning it in practicality is another thing entirely, because that connection between the French, now operating out of Quebec, and the Native Americans remains very strong. So you'll notice if you look at the settlement maps for Maine, there's a reason why things this far up the coast really do not start to come into place until the late 1750s. And that is after that period of time when the Native American and French resistance to English encroachment starts to wane.
So there it is. Maine developed the way it did because of Castine. A small blockhouse called Fort Pownal was built across the river to protect the settlement there and to protect Castine from being flanked. But even though the English claim to Maine is now undisputed by the French, they can still dispute it by encouraging their Indian friends to make trouble if anyone attempts to settle upriver. All those vast resources lie up there in the Maine woods, but if anyone tries to establish a settlement there, it won't end well. That's why you don't see Maine towns coming into existence in Penobscot County until after the French and Indian War. Bangor wasn't incorporated until 1791. But I'm getting ahead of the story, because the American Revolutionary War breaks out before that. The British burn Falmouth, which is what Portland was called back then. The Americans win the Battle of Margaretta and Machias.
And Castine has another run-in with history. And this becomes known as the Penobscot Expedition.
The British are thinking ahead. The war has been dragging on for 3 years, and it'll end in about 2 more. They're setting up for the eventual settlement treaty and would like the Penobscot River to be the dividing line between the U.S. and Canada. So, you need Castine. They set up a colony of loyalists, establish a small Navy base, and construct Fort George, manned by about 600 men.
Word filters down to Boston real fast, where a Governor John Hancock is looking at the situation and says, we need to do something about this. What follows is a very interesting expedition that combines the armed forces of the Continental Navy, the Rhode Island State Navy, the Massachusetts State Navy, and the New Hampshire State Navy, combined with elements of the Massachusetts militia who try to come up here and take the fort back over. They gather a total of 39 ships, ranging anywhere from 32 guns to 2 guns. Most of them are privately owned vessels. A lot of them are not that large, and a lot of them are being run by owner-operators. They have about 1,200 militiamen. Most of them had been working on the farm as the expedition was moving north. They signed on. They show up here,
and all hell breaks loose. The untrained militias are under various state leaders, the ships are under different leaders, and they're running the campaign by committee. The boats don't want to engage the enemy until some of the fortifications are overrun, the troops don't want to engage until some of the enemy boats are taken out, and nobody knows that the British are actually waiting there to surrender if someone would just make a move. They sit there for 3 weeks.
Enter into our picture another historical figure that is very familiar to us, Paul Revere, as he's the commander of the Massachusetts State Artillery, and what he decides to do is set up some gun batteries over on this island here to try to bombard the town. The problem is that he can't aim them high enough to actually hit anything. You're very limited on how high you can take a muzzle-loading cannon. It'll go to about that far, so he's really out of range. So if we go around the corner, they establish another gun battery on what's now Hatch's Cove. The place is ringed by gun batteries, but they really can't hit anything. We keep sitting here for the next 3 weeks. No assault is actually made on the fort. The very morning that the American forces decide to attack, the Army and the Navy had finally agreed that they're going to move in. The British Navy shows up. Word had filtered down to the British base in New York, and they send out a relief expedition to get their soldiers out of trouble. What happens next is either mass panic, disaster, not sure what label to put on it, but it is the worst American naval disaster until Pearl Harbor. Out of those 39 ships, none of them escape. There is a pell-mell retreat up the Penobscot, and one by one, the British Navy picks off every ship that came up. Some of them make it as far north as Bangor. If you're on the waterfront in Bangor, they have a couple of cannon they actually recovered when they're doing the pilings for the Chamberlain Bridge. Probably 9-pounders, so probably American privateer guns. The British remain in occupation here for the next 4 years. Who's to blame for this disaster becomes the topic of Massachusetts politics. The finger and the blame gets put on Dudley Saltonstall, partly because if it's his fault, as a Continental Navy officer, Congress gets to pay for this. If it's Revere's fault, or the Army's fault, the state of Massachusetts gets to pay for this. So Saltonstall gets blamed for it. Revere is actually brought up on charges of cowardice, because during this retreat, he was supposed to save his cannon here and move them to a place that is right on where Fort Knox is now. He either does not or is unwilling to do so. He is court-martialed for cowardice. The judge of this is John Hancock. You remember back in 1775, Revere and him have a history. He's off the hook. It's actually Wadsworth's grandson that writes The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere that brings Revere out of historical rehab.
The end of the Revolutionary War didn't end the battle to control Castine. 2 years into the War of 1812, the British came up and took it again, sending in a fleet and 3,000 men. This actually turned out to be great for the local economy, as money and smuggled goods flowed through town into the British Custom House. Residents were kind of sad to see the British go 9 months later when the war finally ended. That also ended all arguments about where the border was, as it was finally settled by treaty. Up next, we visit the historic lighthouse here and head up the Penobscot River. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. History was made last weekend. The Friendship 5 took passengers from Bar Harbor to Bangor and back, stopping at 11 lighthouses, several historic forts and bridges, all in a single day. This jet-powered catamaran is part of the Bar Harbor Whale Watch fleet, and it can hit speeds over 30 miles per hour. Pretty fast for a boat this big. Now, I got to host it, and you're now getting to hear it. This weekend, we're airing the Bar Harbor to Bucksport leg. Next weekend, we'll get up to Bangor and return. It's never been done before, and it proved to be an exceptional way to see Maine in a way that most people never will. Hey, Maine looks different from this angle. Right now, we're parked at another famous lighthouse in Castine, and our onboard lighthouse expert is Gene Torbeck.
A little bit about the Dice headlight here. D-I-C-E, or D-Y-C-E actually, dominates the entrance here to the Penobscot River. The Dice family, which was D-Y-C-E, owned this site where the lighthouse is located. 1829, the lighthouse service built a rubble and stone brick tower, 59 feet high, located high up on the cliffs here at Dice Head. It was to guide the lumber ships in and out of Penobscot. Also welcomed the clipper ship captains on their last leg of their journeys. A colonial Cape Cod dwelling was added in 1858 and attached to the tower by a short enclosed passageway. At the same time, the original Winslow Lewis light lamp and reflector system were replaced with a fourth order Fresnel lens, which had a visibility here of 17 miles. Also, at that time, the tower was surrounded with a 6-sided wooden frame which was then removed in the late 1800s. In 1891, a 1,000-pound fog bell was hung here. It was originally hung by hand whenever they heard a vessel approaching. Then the shipping fell off in the area, and in 1935 the light was discontinued and replaced by a skeleton tower at the edge of the water. The keeper's house and surrounding property became the property of the town of Castine in 1937. Coast Guard discontinued the lighthouse in 1956, and the lighthouse was turned over to the town. Due to the deterioration of it, they did some renovations in 1998. And in 2007, a windstorm toppled the skeletal tower. Short time later, the Coast Guard announced it would install a new optic in the lighthouse tower, making it an active aid to navigation. This was after 72 years of darkness. A new 250 millimeter optic went into service on 1 January 2008, had a white flash every 6 seconds. Badly damaged by a fire in 1999, the dwelling has been repaired and is actually rented by the town to help pay for some of the upkeep of the property here.
It only takes us about 20 minutes to get from Dice Head Light to Castine to the Penobscot Narrows Bridge. That's actually the point of today's show. It would take 10 minutes longer by car, but Maine looks and acts a lot different from the water. You think you know the state, and you find out you really don't. For instance, I've been on this bridge many times, but I've never been under it, and the perspective is completely different. Amazing.
So here is a very pretty picture, and not one that you normally get to see. This is a special vantage point to see it from the water. We're going to slow down in just a moment here and stop and allow you to get some pictures. We'll pause here, and there'll be an opportunity to get a picture of the bridge with Bucksport in the background there. What a beautiful picture. This bridge is 2,120 feet in length. The height at its peak is 447 feet. The longest span over water is approximately 1,160 feet, and there's a 135-foot clearance underneath. It's a cable-stayed bridge that spans U.S. Route 1 that connects Verona Island to the town of Prospect. You may know this bridge is not too old. It was built in 2007 to replace the old Waldo Hancock Bridge, which was originally built in 1931.
I will point out, too, from the top deck that there are a number of gray seals that are in the water behind us. One is coming up. He just went down, but there's been at least 2 gray seals behind us. Gray seals are the ones that look more like horse faces than puppy dog faces. I'm told they also taste different.
This is one of 3 bridges in the United States that is constructed using a cradle system that carries the strands within the stays from the bridge deck to bridge deck as a continuous element, eliminating the need for anchors. Normally these are steel strands, and each cable has a 1-inch steel tube. But in 2007, they replaced a number of these strands with carbon fiber in an effort to evaluate if this kind of material will hold up better. And so this is the first bridge to have some carbon fiber strands, and they're testing them to see if this will be a better technology to use in the future. This bridge was featured in Popular Science as one of the 100 best innovations in the year 2006 and 7 when it was built. The total cost to build this bridge was about $85 million. That tall tower on the left, you can see, has windows up there. That is an observatory. It's the Penobscot Narrows Observatory. It's open throughout the summer season. It's 420 feet up in the air. I have not been up there, but I have been told it is a magnificent view. Maybe some of you have, but you can look out, especially in the fall. During the fall foliage is a great time to go up there. And It has magnificent view. It's open from May 1st to October 31st. So now we'll go under the bridge.
And with those words from Zach Cliver, Chief Naturalist at Bar Harbor Whale Watch, we hit pause for a week and complete the voyage on next weekend's show. This was a 9-hour trip from Bar Harbor to Bangor last weekend, which took the Friendship 5 around Mount Desert Island, up through Eggemonga Reach, under the Deer Isle Bridge, and now under the Penobscot Narrows Bridge, stopping at lighthouses all along the way. On next weekend's show, we'll go up the river, find a surprise party in the Bangor waterfront, and return to Bar Harbor by a different route, hitting more lighthouses along the way. In one day, we'll see parts of Maine that few people see, and parts of Maine that many people see, but from a completely different angle. Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine is brought to you by Bar Harbor Whale Watch, Hammond Lumber, Doors Equipment, Napa Auto Parts, and EBS. Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine returns next Saturday morning at 9 and Sunday morning at 8. This is Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket.